Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm on spring break. That's the plan, at least. And I sure hope we made it to California. Why do I need to hope for this trip to happen? Well, I'll take you through it. In early February, we were planning a family vacation to Mexico. Ange, Keaton, a friend, and myself were going to go to Mexico, and it was going to be so awesome. But Ange's oncologist told us that Ange couldn't travel to Mexico because of this new trial that he told us Ange was going to be patient number 1 for. Well, it turns out we weren't number 1. We were the first alternate. And instead of doing this trial in early January like the doctor said we were when he took Ange off chemo, and a little side note, our doctor's plan didn't work, and now we're looking for second opinions, and we're kicking ourselves for not doing that sooner. But that's not the point of all this. Ange was bummed because she couldn't go on vacation. But I still had to take the boys on a trip. So I booked a cruise for us, and I picked up the insurance on a cruise line that felt like it was ran by a bunch of carnies. Hint, hint, you should be able to figure out who that is. So we have this new plan, and then Ange goes to the hospital for 28 days. So many emotions later, I realize that a cruise is no longer an option. So I try to cancel, but those greedy bastards at the Circus Cruise Line, you can figure out who those are, and their insurance company were no help, and I lost money on this cruise. But the boys and I still needed an escape, so hopefully the third time is a charm. So we're doing Venice Beach, theme parks, and I'll be doing a lot of work after I drop the boys off. While I feel really guilty for leaving, I know that Keaton needs this, and so do I. And if something happens, we can be home in 5 hours. But to take care of everything, while I'm gone, my mom flew into town to take care of Ange and will be helped by a crew of people that we are so lucky to have in Seattle. Just thinking about this is all so taxing. But speaking of taxing, this whole tariff thing is batshit crazy. While I'm no expert on the matter, I talk to a lot of people who are, and the smartest and most qualified to talk on this situation, in my opinion, sent this message to me. Message tariffs in your next intro. We're totally fucked as an industry. Unmanageable without massive cuts. There is no end game. I know you don't get political, but this is beyond. And I'm not gonna get political, because I'm pretty selfish right now. I exclusively care about my wife and my family and health. Whatever party you voted for matters, but not as much to me. I'll think about that and deal with that when it impacts me later. That said, something is gonna change in the state of the outdoors, and it's not gonna be good. I hope my friends will keep their jobs and I'll keep my sponsors, but who knows? We are heading into uncharted water. I haven't looked at my 401k yet, and I won't for a while. I recommend you follow my lead on that one. Anyways, where am I going here? Oh yeah, I know where I'm going. I have a podcast to get to, and where I'm going is Whistler, and another business episode with a guy whose resume couldn't be any better. Stuart Rempel was a ski bum and a carpenter, and he parlayed that into running Salomon North America, K2, and Whistler. He needs no more introduction than those 3 brands because they're pretty incredible. He's one of those executives that's so passionate about skiing that he's on the hill as much as your average lifty. And that's pretty cool. Before we get into the podcast, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First and foremost, place a sticker order with me. I also work at diecutstickers.com, and I love the company I work for, I love the insurance they provide me, and I love you, my listeners, and I want to offer you something special. So regardless of your order size, when you place an order with me, I'm going to get you 15% off your entire order, and I'm going to waive your setup fee. My boss really doesn't let me waive the setup fee that often, but I'm going to do it here, and if he calls me on it, so be it. To get the deal, email me at mike.powell@diecutstickers.com. After you do that, I'd love it if you also please tell a friend about the show because it really helps things grow. Finally, please, please, please support the amazing brands that make this show happen. They are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, and Best Day Brewing. Now, it's time to chat with Stuart Rempel. You're one of those executives in the ski world that happens to be a ski bum. And first and foremost, before we get into the podcast and talk about your body of work, we should talk about your streak. How and when did you decide to start your incredible streak?
Well, I've loved skiing my whole life since I guess I was in high school. And I sort of moved through the industry and over time, and I ended up at K2 Corp and worked with a great group of people there. And there was an opportunity to test skis on a regular basis. And we were going down to Mount Hood or Mount Bachelor. We went to Europe. I think the group went to South America. I went, but not with that group. And over time, working with Olin Skis and K2 Skis, I guess a number of us realized, oh, we're skiing every month here. And so when I left K2 in 2000, I had skied for a number of years in a row, I guess 6 years in a row. So then when I came to Whistler Blackcomb, it became easier. And of course, there's the glacier in May and June and July, and there was an easy mountain to hike on in August, September, October. And I wound in the odd South America trip and some European trips. And all of a sudden, it was 25 years later, and I was still skiing every month.
That's crazy. What's the total month poundage of that?
Well, at the point of COVID, it was 309 months in a row, which is a little over 25 years. So I skied through August that year, and then it became difficult to get up on the mountain, and the glaciers in this area are receding, and it just wasn't so much fun anymore. The last month my son and I mountain biked up to Black Tusk with our skis teepeed over our backpacks with our boots in the packs, and we rode our bikes to the snow line, and then we skinned up on Black Tusk and got our August ski day in, and that was the 309 month, and that was the end of that streak.
What was the hardest month to get on snow? I mean, were there ever any of those times where you had to hike 5-6 hours to find a little patch of snow to make a couple turns?
The last month going up on mountain bikes, even though it sounds maybe easy, the road, it was long. We ran out of battery power basically when we got to where we were starting our ski tour. And that may have been the hardest one. But there was months when I was hiking in the rain up on Blackcomb on Showcase on the glacier and Horseman Glacier, and you were skiing on scraps of snow. But I had friends, and my son came with me. My wife would be my wingman from time to time and humoring me all the way along.
You mentioned the Horseman Glacier, and a big topic of concern, I guess, for everyone in the ski industry is snow and climate change and everything that's going on. And the one place that I've been able to witness it is that glacier, because I used to go up there in the early 2000s for ski camps, but you've seen it better than anybody else out there. Just being at Whistler for so long, I mean, is it scary what we're seeing up there with the snow melts?
It is totally scary. A couple of days ago, I looked at some archival footage that somebody had shot on a Super 8 camera riding the red chair, the old red double chair on Whistler Mountain. And the filmer panned over to the Little Whistler and the Whistler Peak. And when you look at those photos from 50 years ago, you saw these massive amounts of snow. And when you go up the peak chairlift now, there's a huge cliff at the end. And in those days, there was ice and snow went way, way up into the Alpine. And the same thing on Blackcomb with Horseman Glacier and, the T-bar area now is, even the difference between a year ago and today is radically different in those areas. And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, man, it's crazy because, those camps, nothing really exists up there like it used to. And it used to be just an institution of where people went in the summer. But we will talk about that a little bit later. We're going to get into your life and times. And it was tough doing some research on your early days. There wasn't that much stuff out there. You're Canadian. I do know that. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Okanagan. I grew up in Kamloops and Penticton and went to high school in Kamloops and started skiing when I was, I think, 14 or 15 years old. And my first place that I skied was Silver Star Mountain, and then a couple of local ski hills in and around Kamloops that don't operate anymore. There's some of the lost ski areas of British Columbia. Todd Mountain, which is now called Sun Peaks, was actually closed for a couple of years when I started skiing due to a fire that they had on their chairlift. And so we started skiing, a friend of mine and myself, down in Silver Star and a place called Lac Lejeune, another place called Grandview Ski Acres. And we'd go night skiing, and we were just a bunch of buddies that loved hanging out.
Did you get bit by the bug right away when you're 14 and skiing is the only thing you wanted to do, or were there other things in your world?
I played hockey up until that point, as most
Canadians do, right?
Canadians do, yeah. But I was never that aggressive a hockey player, but it was always fun. And I played baseball and softball and soccer and all those things as a kid. And a friend of mine, Bruce Lind was his name, lost touch with him many, many years ago, said, let's go skiing next winter. And so I actually went to a ski shop in Kamloops and bought a pair of skis and boots and worked in the summer and did different things to make money and bought equipment before I even knew how to ski. My family really weren't skiers. And so I went on my first day with my own gear, didn't rent gear. And the hook was definitely in. I can distinctly remember my first day on snow at Silver Star. And then I basically did everything possible to go skiing. Every Christmas Day, I would find an excuse to sneak out of the house to go up and to go skiing. And then it became sort of my quest in life was to ski and find ways to work in the business and justify my skiing.
So was there a university for you, or did you kind of get into the business right after high school? Because I couldn't really find any of that, but I did see on your LinkedIn that you did 21 years at Salomon and 14 years are unaccounted for. So it kind of seems like you might have been like a sub rep into a rep right out of high school or right out of a couple years of university. How did that work?
Yeah, so my father was with what you'd call the FAA in the U.S. Department of Transport Airports Administration, and he was the manager of the airport in Kamloops, and he was offered a job in Penticton as the airport manager. And I had just finished grade 12 and I had a friend that lived in Penticton. And so I decided, well, I'm going to go down and go to Penticton. And I actually went to what was in those days grade 13 in British Columbia. It's not offered anymore. And it was actually the equivalent of first year university. Well, at the end of that year, I'd been on the ski patrol at Apex Ski Area in Penticton. One of our colleagues was working for a construction company on the ski patrol. He invited myself and another friend to go work on a construction project that late spring and summer. And so I went and started this construction job. And then instead of going on to university that fall, I just kept working in construction because I started to make good money. I was actually a blaster using explosives and working with a driller blaster and making good money, putting it away and thinking, oh, I can just go skiing this winter and be on the ski patrol, the volunteer ski patrol at Apex. So my sights were set just kind of on the really near term at that point was how can I spend the winter skiing?
So you really are a ski bum. It's not like you're looking to be this like ladder climber in the ski industry. You're a construction worker in the summer. You do what every pro does that can't really make ends meet with pro money is you work construction, then you ski all winter, and that's the dream. So how do you work your way into the ski business?
Well, in Penticton, there was a ski shop owner named Al and Millie Menzies, and Menzies Ski Shop had the pro shop up at Apex. And Al was this larger than life guy. Tony Seiler Summer Ski Camp in Whistler. He was really connected in the business. And I worked kind of part-time for them just to be able to get good deals on skis and equipment and gear, etc. And we became friends and he invited me to go to the trade show, which was in Calgary. There used to be Montreal Ski Show, Calgary Ski Show, and then Las Vegas Ski Show. And he invited me to go to the Calgary Ski Show to see how the buying process works for the ski shop. And so I went along and I guess I showed some initiative and he said, come out to the show. And at that point, I met the independent sales distributor for Salomon, Adidas, Dynastar skis, and a bunch of other products. And Al Menzies said to me, you should at some point talk to these guys about going to work for them. So I went back into the construction business that summer and drilling and blasting and making money and skiing the following winter. And the following spring, I got a call from Millie Menzies saying that there was a job in Vancouver at this sales agency, independent sales agency, working in their warehouse, and it could work into a rep job. And they sold Salomon and they sold Adidas was one of the product lines. So I went down and interviewed, and that September 73, I went to work for them. And that was my first job, and I worked 4 years as an independent sales rep. And we did everything as independent reps. We worked in the warehouse, we shipped goods out, We went to trade shows. We went on the road. Adidas was a fabulous line in those days. We had a 28-foot motorhome, Winnebago, that we had kitted out as a sample room. And we used to drive around Western Canada with this motorhome, myself and the other independent reps, and show different ski shops and sports shops all the product for the following year. And that was kind of a riot. And of course, I would stop at ski areas in between and ski and got to know people. And that was a great opportunity. Bob Elliott was the principal of the sales agency, and he was a wonderful man, a wonderful mentor to me, and provided me that great first opportunity to get into the business directly.
When you have a motorhome and you're whining and dining people, showing them the product and skiing along the way, is it pretty much like a traveling party? Because I'm guessing you're in your 20s and 30s, and that has to be like the dream job.
It was fun. We didn't sleep in the motorhome because it was basically kitted out as a sample room. And we weren't partying so much in the motorhome, maybe a little bit. In the summer, I actually towed my boat around behind so that we could go water skiing. I just remembered that 28-foot motorhome pulling a 20-foot runabout that we could water ski behind. But yeah, it was fun. And the other reps in the industry were all good friends. It was a fun time.
It's like a traveling circus, right? Like all you reps are really tight. You guys do your business. And if you're at an event, you're all going to be together at night.
Yeah. The Vegas ski show was one of the ultimate ones that we would all end up at. And we'd have Canada night where all the Canadian reps from all the different companies, even though you're competitors during the day, you were all good friends. And it was lots of fun.
And was the ski hall, back in the late 70s, early 80s, did it have almost an atmosphere like the snowboard hall did in the mid to late 90s of just like a little bit more irreverentness?
Oh, it was crazy, especially in Vegas. The show was kind of crazy and irreverent. And when the snowboard group took over the hall, they set a new standard, and it was pretty wild.
Yeah, I got to go to some of those shows in the early 2000s, and it wasn't as wild as I think as it was back then. But thinking of you being a Salomon rep, you're a Salomon rep at a point when Salomon's known for boots and bindings. Does that mean you're at demos all day long on your hands and knees just turning screws?
Well, when I started with Salomon in the mid-70s, all we sold was bindings. And in the late 70s, we launched the boot. And then in the early 80s, we launched cross country. And in the late 80s, we launched the ski. And I was there from, including my independent rep days, a little over 20 years. And so I saw the launch of all those products. And going from an independent rep selling Adidas and Salomon and Dynastar and all these different product lines to just working directly with Salomon, which was the transition away from the sales agency, and then becoming the Western manager. There was no boots when I first went directly to work for Salomon. There was no boots yet. And then there was no skis until the late 80s, 89. So we've supported other companies with providing demo bindings. The rental shops and the ski resorts, we'd come up and help them mount all their rental and demo bindings on their skis. But there's lots of hands-on work. But by the time we launched the boot and then we launched the ski, I had moved more into regional management and then into marketing. So I didn't have to do as much of the on your hands and knees stuff.
Gotcha. And when you think of the boot, I'm not sure if it happens from the launch of the boot. I don't know when the SX series came out, but you guys set a standard in boots with that rear entry boot that kind of took over for a decade and everybody was in them. I mean, were you guys just printing money at that point? And did that happen right off the bat when you launched the boots?
It didn't happen right off the bat. It was the SX90. It was 1979. The boots didn't fit particularly well. They were a little bit uncomfortable and, they had to be tweaked for performance. But very, very quickly, Salomon, through their research, figured out how to build better boots and more comfortable boots. And ultimately, when the rear entry boots sort of went away from the Salomon group in the early 90s and went into the Integral and then ultimately the styles that they have now, they really perfected the boots. And we had good success in racing. We weren't number one boot in racing by any means, but we had some really credible racers and won World Cups on those boots, even though a lot of people said the boots couldn't work for any level of performance skiers. But they did. And, the boots were modified, but we had fun with the pro racers. And then when we launched the skis, we had skiers that were on the skis, the boots, and the bindings. And yeah, we grew quite dramatically in the era of the boots. And then when the skis came out, it even grew more. It was a fun time.
And when you think about the skis, I mean, you're the North American marketing director of Salomon, but what that means is you're a subsidiary. I mean, everything happens out of France with Salomon, and then they hand you all the tools to kind of go to market with. Were you involved at all in the development and the look and feel of the skis, or do they just hand you the kit after they've developed it and say, sell this?
Well, the development was a fabulous team in Europe. A good friend, Maurice Legrand, was the ski designer, and there was an amazing group of people around him that developed the ski. But there was a real strong collaboration between the different zones in Europe and Asia and in North America in terms of developing the tools to help sell these products. But we tested lots of competitors' products and our own products, and we trained our reps in lots of different ways. The amount of training that the Salomon reps had in those days was amazing, and we had whole teams of people supporting that. So it wasn't a total handoff. We were a subsidiary, wholly owned subsidiary of Salomon and worldwide, but we were all very, very involved as a team. And the products, spoke for themselves, but we really put the emphasis on the marketing, and Salomon had a great marketing team and agencies that worked with us both in North America and in Europe.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Elan Skis. And while I could tell you all about the new award-winning Ripstick ski models or the award-winning Playmaker Twin Tip line, and then push you to demo them at your local shop because they're going to make you have more fun on the mountain, I'm just going to talk about your local shop. There's something special about stepping into your local ski shop. The smell of the freshly waxed skis, discussions about where to find the best skiing, what the shop kids like skiing on best, what they think the best products are, and that expert advice makes these shops more than just a great place to buy gear. Elan believes that ski shops are the soul of skiing, a place where skiers come together for genuine human connection, and that can't be replaced online. And I agree with them. I mean, going to a ski shop is an experience where you connect with a like-minded person who, in a short conversation, understands what you want to do and sets you up with the right gear so you can have as much fun as possible. Shops are among the last authentic pieces of ski community that we have left. So please buy your ski gear from your local ski shop. You can find a list of Elan dealers nationwide over at elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley. It's hard to be known for both being that green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot and being the most popular product in pop culture. But that's what Stanley is these days, and that's what you get when you mix in the quality that Stanley has been known for since they pretty much created the category of keeping drinks piping hot and ice cold in 1913. And lately, over 100 years later, that quality, combined with some incredible colorways, partnerships, collaboration, and events, has made Stanley bigger than ever before. And while they're creating some game-changing marketing, working with people like Olivia Rodrigo and Messi, are you kidding me? That's so cool. But what I love is how functional Stanley's products are. I personally use a Stanley pint glass every single day, and I swear by them. And my wife and so many others out there can't live without their Stanley quenchers. I mean, Stanley makes a product for everyone, and now everyone can get Stanley's incredible products in a colorway that totally suits their style, like my new Miami Vice colored pint glasses. I love my Stanley stuff, and I want you to love Stanley too. And I bet you didn't know that Stanley offers Powell Movement listeners their biggest discount that they make available to the public. That's right. I'm going to save you 30% on all of your Stanley products. Here's what you need to do. Go to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and at checkout, enter the code POWELL2025. That's a capital P and then the numbers 2025 with no spaces in there, and you're going to save that 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Does it ever get frustrating working with Salomon out of France, though, being that you can't have as much say as maybe if you were at K2 when later on in your career, where you kind of have the say at the office and that happens? Is it frustrating when you can't get exactly what you want in cases, or was it always easy to work with?
Yeah, there was certainly times that were frustrating. We launched a pink integral boot that was sort of the successor to the rear entry boots. That wasn't necessarily the most popular color in the ski boot world, and it didn't last very long. But we were told, that's the boot color, and it certainly drew a lot of attention, but it wasn't the color that we would have picked. Maybe even white boots at the time weren't all that exciting to many people, but there were some compromises, but for the most part, the work that was done in the development and the research to get to where we were with the products, skis and boots and bindings, we were very fortunate to have the resources that Salomon had and the research they put into developing products and the money that they spent on engineering and building all these great products. We were very lucky to have the support of the parent company.
And then launching that first line of skis in North America, from a marketing perspective, what's the launch game plan look like?
Well, working with the product managers and the marketing managers from around the world, there was a lot of work that was put into developing a plan. From Salomon Canada was the distributor for Kesley skis for a period of time, so that the reps in Canada would gain some experience in developing skis. When Kesley ultimately knew that Salomon was going to launch their own skis, and then that relationship kind of fell apart. But we learned from that, and we were, through working with our product managers, Jackson Hogan, Michel Benoit, these different guys, we were testing skis. Even before we were selling skis, we were learning about skis, and we did a lot of training. And so we were pretty ready when the skis were launched to put them into the market. And the first year, if I recall, in 89, I think there may have been some economic issues. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then the skis, the graphics, the kind of orangey yellow graphics weren't necessarily the best hit, but we did fairly well with the skis. But the skis performed beautifully, and very quickly, the product line evolved, and, the key series, the 9000 series, did well. And then we launched the Force skis.
Yep.
So it wasn't totally easy, but within 5 years, Salomon went, in the United States at least, went from a company that was known for rear entry boots, for rental bindings, some good high performance products, but it went from a kind of a middle market company to selling some of the most expensive skis in the market and having really broad distribution and great test results and great magazine results for those products. So it took a while to evolve the brand. And that was, as ultimately a marketer, that was what was so rewarding to me, was to watch the evolution of the Salomon brand in that 5-year period.
Yeah. And you mentioned Jackson Hogan in there. And I didn't think he was going to come up in this podcast, but probably one of the most eccentric people in skiing this side of Greg Stump. Was he just an eccentric out there dude to work with as well?
Oh, I knew Jackson from the time he started. I think I may have already been working directly for Salomon, not as an independent rep, but, Jackson was definitely larger than life at sales meetings. We would go to Boston for training for 3 weeks.
Whoa.
There would be the kind of rookie training, and then there was certification training, and then there was sales training. And we had all kinds of great resources. And Jackson was definitely a key individual in those days. And, he then worked into product management, and he was lots of fun to work with.
All right. So you eventually go to Olin Skis. It's like 1994. And does Olin cherry pick you, or do you go to them, or how do you end up on Vashon Island?
Well, I'm a British Columbia guy. And as I said earlier, it was all about skiing. And even though I was living, I was in Canada, and then I'd moved to Boston as the head of marketing for Salomon North America, I didn't really want to live in Boston forever. My 2 kids were born there, and we developed lots of great friendships there. But I was constantly in airplanes traveling to either France, to Salomon, or to the Western United States. We were doing all of our photo shoots and lots of our different stuff in the West. We were involved with promotions. I worked with Greg Stump in his efforts as a sponsor, but we were constantly going back and forth to the West. And, I had been with Salomon a long time. It was in my blood. And one day I got a phone call in 94 from Tim Petrick, who was at K2, and said, we're going to close down Olin Skis in Stowe, Vermont, and we're going to move Olin out to the west, to Vashon Island. And John Douglas, who had been with Rossi, was a great great guy, had been running Olin, and he didn't want to move. And I went home that night and said to my wife, Elaine, an opportunity to move back to the West and live in Seattle, and quite a bit like Vancouver, where we had lived before we moved to Boston. And it didn't take very long to agree to come out and meet Tim and some of the team members. And it was pretty quick and easy. And all of a sudden, I'm working in Boston, and it was much of a change of culture in the companies, and it was very, very different. Salomon was kind of a precise, real marketing oriented, and whereas K2 was fun-loving, shooting from the hip at times, but it was great, and it was a great, great team.
Was Olin the redheaded stepchild of the K2 factory? Because, you have two brands of skis there, but it's hard to look at Olin as an equal, I would think, for a lot of the K2 employees who have that history since 1962. So were you kind of an afterthought?
No, because Tim had really positioned Olin as, this demo team ski and high performance, the DTSL, I think it was called, was actually one of the winner skis in the ski magazine tests. And, K2 had a race program. They had a big, now we would call it a free ride program, but in those days, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but the Extreme, which was the Plake, the whole era with Glenn. And so Olin was more of a demo team ski. There was the DTV, which was a really good selling women's ski that we had developed with the demo team. So the two products were positioned differently. But when we went down to Mount Hood and we tested skis, the K2 testers tested the Olins, the Olin testers tested the K2s. And, we worked really closely with the engineering team. And so I think there was a lot of respect on both sides.
Did you guys share molds or technology or anything? Because at that point, K2 had the 4 come out. It changed the whole game of skiing. And I would think that maybe you guys could have shared some stuff and sold a little bit more Olins, but I don't know.
Well, we did. And in fact, the K2 4 and the Olin Radius shared the same side cut basically, but the top of the skis had a little different dimensionality to them. But they skied somewhat differently, but the Olins were always thought of as a different target, more of a higher end recreational ski as opposed to a racing product.
Okay, and the one thing that I remember from Olin, I was selling Olin at Ski Chalet Tyson's in Northern Virginia. And the one thing that stuck out to me there at that point in time was Smooth Johnson. And that was the big marketing campaign. How did that whole thing come to be?
Yeah, we had an agency in Seattle, Fred Hammerquist. It was called Hammerquist and Sappel. And Fred had worked with the K2 brand over the years. And they came up with this campaign that, it was this Smooth Johnson, the master of the carve. I think in my career, it was one of the more fun campaigns. It was a little bit irreverent. You want to get big air kid, pull my finger. And there was tons of great ads. Fred and I are still good friends, and it was a fun campaign, but it was there to differentiate from the sort of the extreme skiing. And it was about carving and the master of the carve. And it was fun and irreverent.
So that one was successful. Olin had a nice run, but your next move is to K2. Tim Petrick goes to Booth Creek. You take over his post. K24 is kind of done at that point. I think that's kind of on its way out. Do you get the keys for the brand at a bad time where there's not really hot product?
Well, there was still an effort with the development team at K2 to develop the mod technology. And that was kind of an evolution from the K24. And the mod series skis, the Mod X and the Mod X Pro, became really, really powerful skis. And that technology carried on well beyond the time that I left K2. And so I wouldn't say there was a void in terms of technology. I think there were some tougher times in the business in those days. But no, I think the engineering team and the testing protocols all continued just the same.
What I remember from that point in time was maybe the most questionable ad campaign that I've seen outside of Atomic's Triplet series back in like 2000. How did your Mama's a Mountain campaign make it into the market?
Yeah, the mountain with the breast.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things that, K2 did ad campaigns that were kind of unexpected from time to time. That was kind of a campaign that I've since forgotten a little bit about, but Your Mama's a Mountain was definitely something that we were just trying to push the envelope a little bit.
Was there backlash from dealers and consumers? Because I remember people talking about it and people weren't stoked on it at that point. And it was kind of funny if you got it, but most people didn't get it.
There was backlash. We had some dealers that actually took our brochures out of their stores because it was a mountain that was this breast and the baby was beating on the mountain and the breast. And, we were having fun with it. Some people didn't have fun with it. And that was too bad. We were a fun sport. We're supposed to be fun, and Your Mama's a Mountain. And at the end of the day, that kind of positioning feeds a lot of us.
Yeah. So towards the end of your time at K2, it's like a downturn for the brand, a downturn in the industry. I mean, inline is still going up, but I don't think it's going like it was. And the momentum of the four has disappeared. We've got the mod, like you said. But when things aren't firing and you're in the corporate situation and you are the top of the pyramid, do you have the CEO and the CFO all breathing down your neck, putting a lot of pressure on you?
That was a long time ago. I mean, we were a public company. The head office was down in California. Tim actually came out of Booth Creek and came back into the company. I took over some of the international business and Tim took the helm again. And an opportunity came up for me in Canada to work on the resort side of the business. And then the rest was history. I moved on from hard goods to the experience side of the business.
So one thing I'll talk about hard goods really quick, because the industry was changing towards the end of your run at K2. Say 1999, when you look at the landscape of things, that's when people were starting to figure out the internet. And given it wasn't being done a lot, but there were people out there creating shops. And who would have thought that Dan Egan, one of the legendary skiers out there, was also one of the pioneers of e-sales? But he was, and he was kind of gray marketing stuff. And how were you able to get him to stop selling K2s? And what was your thought on internet sales back in 1999?
I don't remember the specifics of Dan Egan, frankly. I know Dan, but
you shut him down, I believe.
I don't personally remember that.
Because he was working with Ken. What's that shop on the East Coast where there's like 50 of them? Ken Jones?
Yeah, I recall it.
So I think they were buying the skis and then they're getting them to Dan and he was selling them online. So he was circumventing the system. And I think you found out and shut it down.
Well, there was always that question about whether, you had dealer agreements with your dealers and distribution agreements, and you were allowed to sell in your geographical area. And that was pretty common in all ski companies. But there was a really, really big debate in those days. And, the online presence, I have to say that at K2, we had a person that worked with us, Julie Herness, at the time that started being connected with Microsoft and developing our website. And all of a sudden, Julie ultimately went to work for Microsoft and did quite well there. But the internet became a really, really big part, an important part of the K2 marketing mix, maybe before a lot of other companies. And we had lots to talk about. We had good products. We had an amazing group of athletes that worked with us in those days. One of the most successful pro teams, I think, that was not necessarily racer oriented, although Bodie Miller was on the K24 at the time. But we had our free ride team back in the day. But the internet and the work that Julie did, and that certainly carried on well after I left. But K2, I think, was a leader in terms of really positioning themselves online as a brand, not necessarily selling direct to consumers, but positioning the brand online.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know there was a connection to Microsoft, and that's kind of how K2 got the jump start on the competition. But it did, and that's fun to find out. But next up, like you say, it's Whistler. It's owned by Intrawest. Did that acquisition happen right when you got there?
Intrawest had been the owner of Blackcomb Mountain for quite some time prior to me joining. And then in 97, Intrawest bought Whistler Mountain, and they merged the two mountains in 1997. And then I joined in the fall of 2000, so that the merger had already happened between, and it was one brand, Whistler Blackcomb brand, with a new identity that had been developed prior to me joining the company. But yeah, I joined in the fall of 2000.
So you aren't there right when the Intrawest acquisition happens, but I'm sure you either know people there or you're up in Whistler or shit, you could have even lived there. I don't know. But when you think about it, were the locals really concerned about what was going to happen to their great area when Intrawest comes in and owns it? Or are they like, no, they've owned Blackcomb, it's going to be fine?
Well, I think if you look at the 50th anniversary video that we did a few years ago, there was certainly some concern about Intrawest acquiring Whistler Mountain, and that the two of them, the Blackcomb was always seen as the dark side, and they were hyper competitive in the valley between the two mountains. And there were certainly some concerns, and there was some changes in personnel. But, by the time I arrived in Whistler in 2000, and I was coming up from K2, we were coming up here skiing. When I lived in Vancouver working for Salomon, I actually had a place in Whistler. So I have lots of friends here over the years and became quite familiar with the place and with the management. And certainly there was a rivalry between the two mountains, but when they merged, that rivalry, by the time I arrived, was for the most part gone. Although there was still lots of people that only had Blackcomb seasons passes, and there was people that only had Whistler seasons passes. And until the peak-to-peak gondola was installed in 2008, that's when the single mountain passes went away and everybody ended up with a Whistler Blackcomb pass. But there was a lot of customers. And today I have friends that don't go to Blackcomb and I have friends that don't go to Whistler. I seem to ski both areas 50-50 because they're both amazing places.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and this time I'm starting out with Outdoor Research. I've been using OR products since I moved to Seattle almost 25 years ago because they outperform everything on the market. I mean, they build products to perform in the miserable weather that the Pacific Northwest can be known for. And when you live here, you need to have best-in-class gear, and that's what OR has always delivered. From building industry-leading gear for mountaineers, which are still best in class, to the mittens that every snowboarder wore in the 90s, which are making a comeback in a big way, to the new styles, cuts, fits, and kits that they've developed with the help of their incredible athlete roster that includes world champion Troy Podmilsack, freeski legend Mark Abma, and X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin, just to name a few. While OR has always been building the best products to outperform everything else in brutal wet weather, the recent focus on style is what has not only me, but my kid and his friends all wanting to wear OR gear. Because now, it looks as good as it performs, and that's a bold statement. But don't take it from me. Head on over to outdoorresearch.com, check out the products, buy yourself something, and stay drier and warmer than ever before. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And if you haven't heard of Best Day, they are hands down the best tasting NA beer on the market. I enjoy Best Day for so many reasons. The flavor is the most important. I swear by the hazy IPA, the Kolsch, and the Electro Lime. The beauty of Best Day is that it really tastes as good or better than an alcoholic beer. I mean, in a blind taste test, if I put an Electro Lime against any Mexican beer, 9 out of 10 times, my friends are going to pick the Electro Lime because they like it better, and you can drink a few of them at the bar or in the parking lot after skiing, and you don't have to worry about driving or making bad decisions. Really, I haven't quit drinking. When I go to the bar to have beers, I always mix in a few Best Days with the leaded stuff, so I can be more functional throughout the night, and an added benefit that I didn't expect was it makes me last twice as long. I mean, I can stay till closing time. I don't know what you were thinking, but if you want to have your best day or night ever, or just want to enjoy a few cold ones anywhere, grab a Best Day and you can forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. To see all the flavors and order some beer, head on over to bestday.com, and if you're flying on Alaska, you can enjoy a Best Day Kolsch at 30,000 feet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. In the 70s and 80s, Whistler was always a bit corporate, but the vibe that they gave off wasn't corporate. And if you look at the 90s and early 2000s, you guys are like the busiest resort in North America. But you were still able to put out vibes that said Whistler was cool and every skier should want to experience the energy that that place delivered. How were you able to do that?
Well, I think these two huge mountains, and when I first moved from Vancouver out to Boston with Salomon, no one really knew anything about Whistler in the late 80s. When you talk to people, they would say, where do you ski? You're from Vancouver. Where did you ski there? And you'd say Whistler or Blackcomb. and they go, oh, what's that like? And there was no awareness. But over time, and then certainly from the merger between the two mountains, and then Whistler Blackcomb became the number 2 ranked resort in Ski Magazine. And all of a sudden, the awareness grew and grew and grew. And the marketing teams, David Perry, that was the head of marketing for Whistler Blackcomb, he's the one that I took over from when he moved to the U.S. And David and the agency teams and the teams at Whistler Blackcomb did an amazing job of positioning the brand, of working with athletes and influencers in those days with their ad campaigns, and doing things like at the Vegas Ski Show. There was lots of effort with the media there in those days, the print media. And there was a big effort with the magazines to create awareness for Whistler and ad campaigns. And the vibe, it was amazing vibe here.
And while a lot of people love Whistler, the one knock on it is the weather. And you never knew what you were going to get if you went and traveled to Whistler. But it sounds like your mantra was, we are never going to apologize for our weather. In fact, we're going to use our weather to market our mountain. How were you able to use that to your advantage?
Well, the physical mountains, they're huge. There's 8,200 acres between Whistler and Blackcomb, and there's this amazing lift infrastructure, and then this great amount of snowfall every year. And then there's these amazing athletes and people that call this place home. And there's filmmakers and photographers and writers that are living here and living and breathing the culture here. And there was an amazing free ride team. There was an amazing group of people promoting this place. And the ski experiences, sharing the videos and the stories and the photos of this place. And that sort of, in my view, transcended, if we never apologize for the weather, because the weather can be wild here. But at the same time, the infrastructure, the mountains, the snow can overcome that. And it does. And this place has an amazing mountain culture, and it continues to this day. A lot of people talk about the good old days. Well, to lots of people, today is the good old days. For them, it's what they're living. And I see that. I'm on the mountain just about every day, and I see that same energy that I saw when I first skied here in the early 70s as a high school kid, and coming and working here, and now being retired or semi-retired. I see the same energy in the people that I saw in those days.
Well, you say that, and I didn't want to bring this up until later in the podcast, but you say the energy's the same, but over the years, there's been a couple acquisitions, whatever. And then in 2016 or something, Vail comes in and they buy Whistler for a whopping $1.1 billion. And when you think about you saying there's the same energy there, it seemed like the skier experience definitely changed with the whole mega pass and how Vail was running things. And I don't know if it happened right away, but I've seen pictures of people like lined up almost to like the grocery store, it seemed like, to get to the lift. And the skier experience has changed a little bit. When you look at the corporate monster that has come in, what have they done to that experience at Whistler?
Well, at the end of the day, the two mountains haven't changed at all. Certainly the glaciers may have receded a little bit, but we still get lots of snow. And in fact, in Vail's defense, they've put in some fabulous lift infrastructure. Wizard Solar went away, and the new Blackcomb gondola is there, and Cat Skinner is a high-speed lift now, and the Fitzsimmons Express is an 8-pack, Emerald's a 6, the Creekside gondola, Big Red. There's lots of new lift infrastructure, so there's lots of lifts. We could probably use a few more restaurant seats up on the mountain, and there is a master plan that was developed years ago, and you can actually look it up online still with the BC provincial government and see kind of the possibilities for this place. It can be a lot bigger than it is today, and I think it ultimately might become a little bit bigger. But yeah, sure, there's, when we had COVID, we had lines snaking all over the place because of the lifts. You'd have 2 people in a 10-passenger gondola because of COVID, and 2 people or 3 people on a chairlift that held 4 or 6. So there were big lines, and on powder days, there is big lines. But I ski just about every day, and I certainly am aware of, where do I need to go in the morning to avoid lineups and what times of the day, not coming back to the village. But prior to Vail, we had big lines here as well. And it's still the place that it was. The skier mix has changed a little bit, and the visitor mix has changed a little bit. And you can kind of notice that in the flow of skier traffic on the mountain. But at the end of the day, I still go up and have a great time every day.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, I think you retired like right around the time that they came in or at that end of that season. So in all the media and stuff I read, it was like you said you were retiring anyway, and you said all the right things, and you're saying all the right things here. But when you were at the helm, it seemed like the way that the resorts were working is they were pushing everybody from single day tickets to 3 and 4 day tickets. Like, hey, if we can trap them here at the resort for 4 days, we can take their money in other ways, whether it's restaurants here, there, whatever. Then the whole Vail thing came in. It was like, hey, we are going to give a cheap pass out there. We're going to trap everybody into our resorts, and then we're going to take every single penny we can. And I mean, did you see that experience at Whistler? Because it's like, I mean, the first thing they did, it seemed like, was they came in, they cut all the athletes, they cut all the spends. I mean, you guys were lucky to get that 50-year movie out, I feel like. If it wasn't for you, if it was like the Vail people there, they would have killed it. But I think you were there like lobbying and fighting for it.
Well, the 50th anniversary was the year before they acquired the mountain. So they came in at the end of 2016, and there was a movie that was done by the team that I left, the marketing team. I think it was called Magnetic.
Yeah, that's it.
And that movie was pushed through, and I can't really say whether or not that would not have happened under Vail. But yeah, I mean, the whole way in which we marketed Whistler Blackcomb, and Vail has successfully marketed the Epic Pass. And it's more about the Epic Pass as opposed to the individual brands. We were a publicly traded company at Whistler Blackcomb for the last 5 years that I was there, but we controlled the way that the company would operate with our board and with the management team, the way that the brand was positioned and the way that we positioned the company. And we promoted Whistler Blackcomb. That was our brand, whereas you don't see Whistler Blackcomb ads per se anymore. You see Epic. They're selling an access product. That's their brand. And they've done very successful with that. And, skiing to people that ski frequently has never been cheaper than it is today. And that's why you get lots of people here. But at $329 at Christmas at the ticket window, that's Canadian dollars, it's less affordable for those people that are just going to come up for the day. So that's been a rub for sure in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, just the cost of skiing in general, the expense, it's so crazy. I mean, I've been in the industry my whole life, so it's always been pretty cheap for me. But getting my kid into it, I almost feel like, I don't want to say it's a mistake because he loves it, but at some point he's going to have to shell out a shitload of money because there aren't any other sports other than like boating that cost as much as skiing, I feel like, on a yearly basis.
Yeah, there's no question. We have to find ways to get kids hooked young. And there are still products, kids under 6, I think, still ski for free. And then there are less expensive programs. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you're trying to get your family up to go skiing, it's an expensive proposition. There's no question. And I don't necessarily have an answer to that. Maybe if I did, I'd go back to work. But
But all in all, you don't need to go back to work. You've had a storied career. And let's end this with a career highlight. You've had incredible days on the mountain with some incredible skiers. And if you can rewind life to one day in the mountains, where were you, who was there, and why?
Well, there's been lots of days.
I'm sure.
I've been very fortunate to work with some amazing people in my career, and not just the colleagues and the people that work for me or with me or who I work for. In all the companies that I've worked for, I've worked for 3 organizations, Salomon, K2, and Whistler Blackcomb in my career. And all of them, there's some amazing, amazing memories. Skiing with Scott Schmidt. I was at Salomon way back in the day, one of his first sponsors with just Salomon bindings. He was on K2 skis and the North Face, and working with guys like Stumpy on many of the different movies that Greg did over the years. But, making a run at Salomon when we were launching a boot in Park City with Ingemar Stenmark, hanging out with Bodie Miller when he was in his early days of World Cup ski races in Park City. I mean, there's so many things that I've been able to do. And, in the background, I've been very connected to the heli ski business in British Columbia. I'm a longtime fan of CMH heli skiing, and we acquired Whistler heli skiing at Whistler Blackcomb. So that's a big drug in my bloodstream as well. So I ski often with my wife, several days a week together with my kids. At one point, we skied with my wife's father. So there was 3 generations of us all skiing together. Those are amazing memories. And I hope my kids can do the same thing with me when I have grandkids.
That's pretty cool. Well, that's the body of our podcast. But I end the show with something that I call inappropriate questions. I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week, I was able to get one of your former athletes, a guy that helped turn the whole sport of skiing around. I'm talking about your neighbor, the legendary Mike Douglas, to ask these questions. And are you ready for question number 1 from The Godfather?
Absolutely.
Here we go.
Question number 1, Stuart. You spent a lot of time at Salomon back in sort of the glory days of the ski industry when there was a lot more money flying around. What was the craziest party or scene or piece of debauchery that you can remember from those days?
All right.
Well, it was funny. I was thinking about this the other day. Doug Perry, who founded the World Ski and Snowboard Festival here in Whistler, started with the World Technical Skiing Championships. And in 93, 94, and he was a Salomon sponsored guy. And we communicated about getting a team of Salomon skiers to come out to Blackcomb Mountain. At the time, it was pre-merger for the inaugural. It was the first event of the World Ski and Snowboard Festival called the World Technical Skiing Championships. So we brought some of our athletes, pro skiers, and I think we had 4 athletes. And it was an amazing event. It was in the springtime, and it was lots of fun. And Doug had these great ideas. And there was a dinner at La Rua restaurant. And I was just talking about that the other day. It was one of those, I think, thank you, George, we used to say to George Salomon for the amazing dinner and few drinks that we had that night. But it was one of the most wildest parties that I think I experienced in my career.
Just the whole event or the dinner? I mean, are you talking about broken glasses and booze everywhere, or what are we talking about?
No, it was just a dining room full of skiers from the World Technical Skiing Championships and sponsors and coaches. And it was just a wild scene of people that were from the industry at the end of the year in the spring. And it was just amazing. And I think that was one of the last events that I attended as the head of marketing for Salomon. So.
All right. Well, that's question number 1. We'll jump into question number 2.
Question number 2, Stuart, you were involved in launching a lot of products into the ski scene, both at Salomon and K2. What was a product that you honestly never fully believed in? You were trying to sell it in, but you were like, I don't really see this one.
I would say BBR, but I don't know if you were there then.
No, I wasn't there at Salomon for the BBR. I think we were talking about the pink Salomon Integral boot. And that was a boot that, Salomon was trying to be different. And ultimately, Salomon just built a really great overlap boot. And ultimately, and that's where the direction that their boots went for many, many years. But to go from the rear entry, which was a distinct product, and at the end of the day, the last rear entries that we sold were really excellent boots. And then we went to the Integral, and Ingemar Stenmark was helping us launch this boot. But at the end of the day, with this pink boot, I think that was kind of where we thought sort of all hope was lost.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they saw the light very, very quickly and changed it. But I'd say that was the product that I didn't really want to put my foot in.
All right. So didn't want his foot in the pink boot. We will go with your final inappropriate question.
So in your time at Whistler Blackcomb was always known as a cutting edge marketing spot. You were at the helm. Was there ever a shoot, a campaign, or any marketing thing that you felt, maybe we've gone too far on this one?
Well, with ad campaigns, I used to tell the team at Whistler Blackcomb, scare me. And, from time to time, the team at Whistler Blackcomb did scare me with a few of the campaigns and the ad agencies. But there was a couple of ads, but one was a man's hand reaching around, opening up a woman's bra. And the team at the time, our marketing manager, Christy Allen, was a woman, and we had lots of women in the marketing and sales team and management team. And the agency came up with this, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something to do with remembering the first time and this double meaning, double entendre about opening up this bra for the first time. And we had some people criticizing that campaign. And yeah, that may have been one that we were pushing the envelope a little bit and got a few people's noses out of joint. I don't know you could pull that off in today's day and age, but that was more than 20 years ago. So that was an ad campaign that had me a bit concerned.
All right. Well, that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And your career is so interesting because you did what you did without university. It's like most people would have to go to 4 years of school, maybe get their master's, and they'd ski here and there, but they wouldn't be able to get to where you got in the world without that education. But you had just pure ski bum tenacity and brains to go along with it. And the way that you worked and the people that you met, you were able to fish your way all the way through the ski industry to the top. I mean, if you look at the 3 jobs that you had, you're with Salomon, running their whole thing in marketing in North America. Then you're with K2, running the whole K2 brand. And then you're with Whistler. So it's like 3 of the most iconic brands in the world of snow. And you're at the helm of all of them. And that's something that's hard to do without a great education. But you know what? You're a smart dude who is able to do it. And everything I read about you said that you felt you got better at your job the more days that you spent on snow because you had your nose to the ground and you saw everything that was happening. And you know what? Everywhere you've been has been a success. So that thing has worked. And I want to thank you for telling your story. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was fun.
So that was time with Stuart Rempel. And it blows my mind how far he was able to go without college. When that happens, you have to be sharp as a tack, have a magnetic personality, and also be a visionary. And looking at Stuart, he is that guy. And he's lived an absolute dream life for any self-professed ski bum. That's the podcast. At this point, I want to ask you to review me wherever you listen with stars or with a written record. It's easy to do. You can listen to one of my last podcasts to get the information, or I'll tell you in a future one. I'm not going to give you all the details here, but it is greatly appreciated. What is also appreciated is you listening every week and you supporting the incredible brands that make the show happen. They are Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.